the real secret to pie dough in general is just lots and lots and lots of practice.
I'm Robin Sussingham, and this is The Zest. Citrus, seafood, Spanish flavor, and Southern charm, The Zest celebrates cuisine and community in the Sunshine State. This week, we're indulging in some of our favorites. We'll hear baking tips from the author of Sister Pie. We'll learn about the history of Tampa's love affair with Café con Leche. And to cool off in these relentlessly hot days of summer, we'll taste Tampa Bay's craft beer scene. Sweets, suds, and a jolt of caffeine coming up on The Zest. What to do with all the gorgeous summer fruit that's available right now? The answer just might be pie, and baker Lisa Ludwinski is taking it to a new level. She's the owner and head baker of Detroit's Sister Pie, and author of the cookbook Sister Pie, the recipes and stories of a big-hearted bakery in Detroit. Our correspondent Janet Keeler recently chatted with the two-time James Beard Award semifinalist about why she thinks pie is making a comeback, how social media has played a part in her success, and yes, we all need this. Tips for baking a better pie crust.
Hey, Lisa, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful. Thank you for taking some time to talk to us today about your wonderful cookbook, Sister Pie. I spent
My pleasure.
Spent some time with it over the past few days, and it's really lovely. The photographs are beautiful.
Oh, thank you. We worked with an incredible local photographer named Emily Berger, and she was able to kind of bring a whole new perspective to our bakery and our baked goods. So it was a real treat.
The book feels very, very modern, very contemporary to me. Your story is very contemporary because of the crowdsourcing that you did to raise money to get it going. And so tell us a little bit about the philosophy of Sister Pie.
I started Sister Pie about 6.5 years ago, and my intention with starting it was that I wanted to have a food business that had a mission beyond just making money and making good food. And so when Sister Pie was created, and it's called Sister Pie because it's a nickname that my younger sister and I have shared for each other, I was able to even kind of deepen that perspective and think about what sisterhood could look like in a business.
Well, so I think we should all think about that as we give our siblings nicknames, right? What can we eventually use for a business name?
How can we profit on this?
That was really fortuitous, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we don't really call each other that anymore, but in my family, nicknames always morph into a variety of weird things, so we actually stopped calling each other that a long time ago.
Let's talk about some of the recipes and some of the ways that you came about them. One of the things I really like about the cookbook is all the tips that you give.
Oh, good.
There's so many fantastic tips, and let's start first with the idea of baking a crust and why that's so difficult for so many people. And when I say people, I mean me to roll out a pie crust. What's the big challenge?
Well, I think pie dough is for sure the most intimidating part of making pie for anyone, and everyone kind of is intimidated by a different step. I think for the rollout process, people often don't rest their dough long enough, and that results in a dough that is, crumbling apart when you go to roll it out, or it's too warm, and so it's melting really quickly. And so I think it's about kind of making sure that you've rested your dough in the fridge, that it's really, really cold. And then from there, it's about following, really basic steps and not trying to kind of overwork it or overdo it. And so I've really tried in the book to lay those steps out as clearly and as simply as possible so that it's kind of foolproof. But with that said, the real secret to pie dough in general is just lots and lots and lots of practice.
Yeah, that's true. For some reason, that's not working for me, but I'm going to try one of these recipes in here, and I'm determined to conquer the pie dough with your instructions. So let's talk about some of the recipes. When we talk about modern recipes, there's certainly some that you've put a modern twist on. Can you talk about some of them that you particularly like?
Sure. Well, I guess I'll start by saying that, we're a seasonal bakery, so we're working with farmers in Michigan to make sure that we're, utilizing the produce that they're growing at the time of year that it's meant to be grown. And so I think a really cool example of a pie that we make is one called Blue Barb Blossom. It's kind of a mouthful, but we use Michigan blueberries, Michigan rhubarb, and it's this beautiful time in the year when both of those are growing. It usually happens in July. And then we have some friends who have a farm in Detroit, and they grow all sorts of things, but what I especially love are these edible flowers that they grow. So calendula and marigolds. And we'll take those flowers from them and we'll kind of pick off all of the petals. We'll pulse them in a food processor with some granulated sugar. And then we'll use that to sweeten the pie. And we'll also put little petals of flowers in the crumble topping. And so the pie itself, once it's baked and cooled, has this nice sort of floral aroma and taste. It's not something that's going to, I think, turn you off from the pie, but it just adds a slightly more interesting element and also allows us to kind of showcase these people that we work with. And I think that's really what it's about for us, is using the resources around us to make something interesting and delicious.
So I'm looking at that recipe right now, the Blue Barb Blossom Pie, and I see it has 2 packed tablespoons of mixed fresh edible flower petals, and you named some of them, the calendula and marigold, bachelor button. So what if you're not lucky enough to live around a place where we can get those and you leave that out?
Well,
or should you put something else in? Or should we just come visit you in Detroit?
Any and all of the above. I mean, I think those flowers are pretty accessible.
Okay.
During the summer months, like wherever you are. I think there's probably got to be a farm or a place at your farmer's market where they're growing those types of flowers. It's definitely totally okay to leave them out.
Okay.
Another thing you could do is use dried flowers, so like lavender buds or rose petals, and those are going to tend to be a little bit stronger in their flavor.
Would you
and
use
scent.
less since they're dry?
Yeah, so I would
potent?
use less.
Okay. Can you talk maybe about a favorite? You have some savory recipes in here too.
Yeah, we have lots of savory recipes. I think my favorite one is also probably our most popular at the bakery. It's the egg on top galette. It's in the breakfast chapter. And a galette is kind of like a free-form pie. And so this one has a buckwheat buttermilk pie crust. And then we layer sweet potatoes and cheddar on the bottom of it that are seasoned, with just some salt and pepper and olive oil. And then we kind of fold it up so that it looks really nice. We bake that in the oven at kind of a high temperature. And then once it's almost done, we take it out of the oven, decrease the oven temperature by quite a bit, and we crack an egg on top and then put a little salt and pepper on that. Back in the oven it goes, and it is just a really special breakfast treat. And I think making it at home is almost even better than getting it at the bakery, because at the bakery, maybe you're getting it when it's sat for 10 minutes, but when you can eat that galette straight from the oven with that beautifully cooked egg and maybe a side of Dijon mustard, it's just heavenly.
Well, and I'll tell you, it sounds fantastic. I'm gonna definitely try that. But for a pastry challenged cook, the galette, I'm all about the galette, right? 'Cause I can do that kind of free form thing.
Yeah,
it's supposed to look rustic.
Lazy pie, right?
Right.
Yeah.
It's supposed to look rustic. That's what I always say.
Yeah.
What is it about pie that people love so much?
I think pie is very welcoming. It's very homey. It makes you think of your childhood. What I like about pie a lot is that it's a shared dessert. It always kind of welcomes a family to sit down and eat together, or a group of friends to sit down and eat together, because it's really a food that's meant to be shared. And I think that there's kind of some warm, fuzzy feelings that come with pie, and everyone thinks of pie as true comfort food.
Thank you very much, and I wish you a lot of luck as you continue with the bakery and also working on this book and your next book, maybe. We'll look forward to that.
Oh, yeah. We'll see. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Lisa.
That was the Zest correspondent Janet Keeler speaking with Lisa Ludwinski of the Detroit bakery Sister Pie, and the author of the cookbook of the same name. You can find recipes for some of Lisa's pies, including sweet potato coconut pie, apple sage Gouda pie, rhubarb rosemary streusel pie, and more on our website, thezestpodcast.com. Next, how about some Cuban coffee with that pie? It turns out that coffee played an important role during the heyday of Tampa's cigar industry. Rodney Kite-Powell of the Tampa Bay History Center breaks down our region's love affair with coffee and explains how to make proper Tampa-style café con leche.
Café con leche, it's coffee with milk, but it really is a lot more than that. In Tampa's history, it's almost one of those kind of cultural paragons. It's one of those things that has fueled, so to speak, the city for well over 100 years, and its importance in the cigar factories is something that, and all that you hear about the cigar industry isn't talked about a lot.
So the cigar industry was really central to the birth of Tampa, especially an area called Ybor City, where the Cuban immigrants would come, and they often worked in the cigar factories. We're talking about the turn of the 20th century.
Yes, absolutely. And so not only Ybor City, but West Tampa. There were two large manufacturing centers for the cigar industry, and it absolutely contributed to the birth of the modern city of Tampa, beginning in the 1880s. And most of the workforce was Cuban, although there were Spaniards and Italians that were in both Ybor City and West Tampa. But it was the Cuban workforce that particularly enjoyed that cup of coffee. And the idea of the cigar industry, it's a hand crafted industry. There were no machines at that time. Later in the late 1920s, 1930s, they introduced machines. But prior to that, you were sitting at a table as a cigar worker, and you were just rolling cigars, cigar after cigar, hour after hour. And you needed to be at your bench to do that. And they wanted to make sure you didn't just go home, and then not come back, because they needed that work done. So you actually had a relationship between cigar factories and restaurants that were close by, and you had what were called cafeteros, generally men who would come with pre-mixed and pre-sweetened café con leche, and they would bring just large pots of it to the factory, and they would pour cups of coffee during people's workday. And so their coffee break was taken at their workbench so they could keep going. And there's that caffeine and that sugar that rolled over 400 million cigars every year in Tampa.
So you didn't need an espresso machine. They went ahead and pre-mixed it.
Yeah, well, of course they were making it in an espresso machine, but yeah, they would have already had the coffee made. They would have already had the milk steamed, and they would be sweetening it with sugar and sweetened condensed milk. And so that's one of those keys in the manufacturing for those who want to try their hand at making their own café con leche. Putting a little bit of salt in the coffee and using sweetened condensed milk as well as a little bit of sugar to sweeten it. Will get you that kind of authentic café con leche taste.
Okay, so take me through it. What kind of beans?
Well, they are espresso beans, and so they're roasted.
Would they be roasting them here in Tampa?
Absolutely. There were coffee roasters, and still are coffee roasters, Naviera being the big one here in Tampa. And so, of course, the coffee beans are grown around the world, not in Florida, although they've tried to do that. And so you roast them, and you roast them darker. And so people have the idea that the strong taste implies a stronger and higher caffeine content, but actually that roasting will take away some of the caffeine.
It takes some of the acidity out too.
It does, and so you have, and the salt will kind of balance that out as well. And so you run your espresso machine after having the coffee roasted and ground, and sometimes at that point. Some don't want the leche. They want just the coffee. So it's café solo, which would be sweetened, though. Sugar is because of the Cuban origins of this particular version of coffee and milk. The sugar is pretty important. And then that sweetened condensed milk, again, from the preservation standpoint, because milk will spoil prior to refrigeration. So having that sweetened condensed milk allows it to store and be more stable as far as the shelf life. So you have to have the coffee, the espresso, but also steamed milk. It's not cold milk. It's not boiled milk. And so it's a little different than a café au lait in New Orleans. And so where the milk is steamed, And you can kind of do your own proportions. Some like half and half milk, half coffee. Some like a lot more coffee. Some like a lot more milk. And then that sweetened condensed milk to sweeten it, and a little bit of sugar, a little bit of salt, and you're on your way.
Rodney Kite-Powell, a historian with the Tampa Bay History Center. Thank you, Rodney.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
There are a lot of opinions on the right way to make café con leche, but we found a recipe that's close to the way that Rodney describes it, and it's on our website, thezestpodcast.com. Florida's craft beer industry is booming. I recently sat down with some local brewers and industry insiders, and we came up with some perfect craft beers for these hot summer months. Tampa Bay is a craft beer hub, and here to discuss craft beer with us is Neil Callahan, brand ambassador for Cigar City Brewing. We've got Danny Dom, she's the co-owner of Mastery's Brewery in St. Pete Beach, and Sean Nordquist, executive director of the Florida Brewers Guild, and Stephanie Colombini, Florida Matters producer, just came in here because she wants to try some of this beer too. Hi, Stephanie.
Hi.
Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Okay, so what I would like to do with all of you is give us kind of a craft beer 101 of the different types of beer and their differences. But first, Neil Callahan brought in some different things for us to taste from Cigar City Brewing. I'm holding a cucumber.
It's a cucumber Saison.
And this says it's a farmhouse ale with natural flavors added. So we're going to crack these open right now and see what we think. Has everybody got the same thing here?
Mm-hmm. We're all drinking the same thing.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Ooh.
I always try to show up with beer and make a lot more friends doing
You
that.
make so many friends like that, Neil. Okay.
You taste
So
the
I'm not going to
cucumber.
drink too much of it because I've got to get to the end of this podcast. But
I'll help you out.
So I was telling Sean, Sean's been around the brewery for years and years, so he's seen this beer grow from 2012 was the first year we brewed this beer. We had brewed it draft only for quite a while. Then we moved it over to 22-ounce bottles, and this is the first time we're ever putting it in 12-ounce cans. So that's why when Sean saw it, his eyes kind of lit up. Went, "Whoa, really?"
Okay, it's delicious.
I have loved this beer since the first time it came out. In fact, I think the first time I had it was probably at Hunapoo's Day in 2012, which is the big festival that Cigar City does every year. And somebody brought me just a little sample of it, didn't tell me what it was. And I probably had the same reaction then. My eyes lit up because it's so light and refreshing and has that cucumber flavor to it, which I really liked.
Yeah.
And it's not overpowering. It's and so I've been a big fan of this beer for forever, and I didn't realize that it was going to be in cans. So I'm really excited now.
So where can people pick this up? This is from Cigar City Brewing.
The cucumber Saison that's exclusive to our tap room, that's over on Spruce Street in Tampa. That's a beer that we might look into distributing around the Tampa Bay area at some point, but for right now, this is exclusive to the Cigar City Brewery on Spruce Street.
Okay, so Cigar City is distributing nationally now, aren't you?
22 states, correct.
Okay, wow. Okay, so this is delicious. And this says it's a farmhouse ale. Is that a type of beer, like an IPA or something? Is farmhouse one of the types?
Sure, it's the word Saison is really the style designation on this one. So Saison, it's a beer that originated in Belgium. Originally, obviously the word Saison means season in French. So originally this was a beer that was brewed in the spring, usually fermented over the summer when there were warmer temperatures, and then served to Belgian farmhands during the harvest in the fall. So it was meant to be a effervescent, refreshing beer. Sometimes it can end up being a little higher in the ABV. You'll see 6, 7, 8% Saison sometimes. With this one, we went on the lower end, so 4.2% on this one. For the style itself, the Saison, you expect a little bit of bitterness. You're also going to get a little bit of like a cracked black pepper phenolic quality. So just a little bit of spice to it. You also expect some herbaceous quality. Lemongrass, fresh cut grass. Again, think earthy, herbal, light, effervescent, refreshing. And then in this beer, we're adding a cucumber essence. So it's essentially a distillate of cucumber. It's 100% natural. It's nothing fake or artificial that's in any of our beers. In the past, it's been a little bit more cucumber forward. So it was a very polarizing beer for quite a while. If you liked cucumber, people lost their minds over it. If you weren't such a cucumber fan, it wasn't the beer for you. Now we've kind of scaled the amount of cucumber back just a bit. I feel like that black pepper, that spiciness kind of comes through the beer a lot more, really in a complementary way to the cucumber in the beer.
Is this available all year round, or do you have summer beers and fall beers?
We're all over the map. We have some beers like the High Life IPA that are available all year round, 365 days a year. We have some beers that are available seasonal, so maybe 3 months out of the year you'll be able to get something like Cubano Espresso Brown Ale. We have some beers that are available just for one day. Sean mentioned Hunapoo's, which is a big imperial stout that's only available one day a year. This one sort of falls in we're brewing it every now and then to see how the market reacts to it.
Okay, so Danny, Neil is brand ambassador, so I think he's very, very good at describing beer, isn't he?
He sure
But
is.
what about your most popular? Tell us a couple of your most popular kinds of beer and describe those.
Sure. Well, I've got a Saison on my mind. We have a Beach House Saison, and that's in distribution to some select places across Pinellas County. But that is more of a traditional style Saison, so stone fruity. I find it's a gateway for a lot of wine drinkers. We'll try it because it's not overly hoppy. It's really refreshing, and it's something we have on tap. It's one of our flagship beers, so
Okay.
we try to have it on all
That
the time.
is great advice right there, because a lot of my friends
gateway.
that are wine drinkers that might go to a craft beer place and want to try something, this could be a Saison, and it's spelled Saison. That could be a good thing to try then. So what does yours taste like?
So, like I said, stone fruit, it's just effervescent, light. It's a medium color, though. So a lot of times, like we said earlier, the color can be deceiving. So don't go just on color when you're choosing a beer, or be scared if you get a taste and it's more of a golden color. So ours is grapey, but not sweet necessarily, but it's just very smooth.
Sean Nordquist, what do you want to describe? What do you suggest for these hot summer months?
For me, I've been involved in beer for a really long time, and I think most people go through an evolution of the styles they like. I started off really being drawn to the stouts and porters. I liked the darker, the maltier side of things, a little bit sweeter.
I think of those as thicker, kind of.
Well,
is that like Guinness? Would
Yeah,
Guinness be?
like Guinness would be, and now Guinness is that's that dry Irish stout that's they use nitrogen with it, so that's what gives it that real sort of creamy mouthfeel and real thick head on it, which you'll actually find a lot of craft breweries doing now, using nitrogen. So they'll take some of their porters and stouts, and sometimes even their IPAs and other ones, and using nitrogen, and it gives it a really smooth, soft mouthfeel to it, which is nice. People also, I moved in for a while into the hoppy field, where I was a big hop head for so IPAs, double IPAs, things, the more hops, the better. Sours, which are really, some can be really interesting. Everything from really funky and strange, and you think there might be something wrong with this, to the point of just being really tart and really, really sort of puckering. I find myself now coming back to some more traditional things like an English bitter or a mild or a brown ale. That's it's just a really almost like a comfort food, like almost like a comfort beer. It's moderate alcohol, 4 to 5%, maybe 6%. It's really smooth. It's really well balanced. But I think I'm probably still a hop head at heart. So I like the American pale ales. I like the IPAs. Out on the beach, I'm going to go with probably an American pale ale, a little bit lower in alcohol. I can have a few more of them when I'm on the beach or on a boat.
Well, what has to be in beer to make it beer? Hops?
Barley, water, and yeast are the four.
They have to be. Those things have to be in there, and then you can play with that.
Then you can do and hops. Hops are actually probably a little bit. I would say the vast majority of beer are going to have hops. There are some beers that are made without hops. They use other things as a bittering agent or as a balance. You won't find very many of those.
Is hops what makes it bitter?
It's part of it. There's also the kind of bitter you can get from some roasted malts. Will give a bitter like the bitterness of coffee or or dark chocolate, you can also get from the malt.
So what else would you guys advise for someone who is used to Budweiser? Something that seems kind of, I won't say bland, but it's easy, easy to drink. It's not going to be too bitter or too sour. What's a good entry-level craft beer for somebody like me?
I think the thing to do is find the brewery that's closest to your house and go there. We talked
Ask
about
them.
it. We talked about it earlier. Go ask, say, hey, I'm normally a Bud drinker or a Miller drinker or whatever, and I'd like to try something craft beer, but what I've had is, it's been too much. It's too strong. It's too you're going to be more than welcomed into that group, saying we've got here, try this, and it's probably going to be a golden ale, a lager, a pilsner, something like that to start with, okay. and then that's going to open doors to more and more styles.
And the beer that Cigar City usually uses to kind of open that door for the non-craft drinker, it's just called lager. It's called Cigar City Lager. It's a German-style lager, all German ingredients with the exception of the water, which is obviously from Tampa. Light, crisp, easy drinking. Compared to a Budweiser, it is going to be even a little bit lighter in body. Budweiser is using corn. It's using some rice as well, which sometimes to me, I always think corn kind of coats the tongue a little bit, where you're not going to get that with lager. But it's not an overly bitter beer. It's moderate ABV, 4.5%. So it puts it in that same ballpark as your regular Budweiser or your Miller. It's not a beer we designed specifically for the light beer drinker, but it's a beer that I always put in front of a light beer drinker, and usually I'll get I can drink that. I can get into that. And again, you're interfacing with a product that was brewed in Tampa, and you're interfacing with a product that it's got more thought. It's got more soul behind it than drinking a Budweiser that you can drink anywhere in the world.
All right, you're brewing it here, but where are you getting your ingredients? Are your hops coming from all the way across the country or from across the world? And how hard is it to ship? Are they fragile ingredients?
Essentially, you're processing most breweries in the country, even in the Pacific Northwest, which is closer to a hop growing region, are using pelletized hops. So essentially, you're breaking the hop down, forcing it through a die, and it kind of looks like little pieces of rabbit food. So it's making it more stable, it's maintaining more of the essential oils, and it's not introducing as much vegetation. It's not literally taking up as much space in the kettle as the pellets are, or the whole cone flours are taking up more space in that kettle than the pellets would be. So for the most part, you're not going to see brewers in Florida using fresh hops or wet hops, whereas in certain other parts of the world, like on the West Coast, for instance, they'll do wet hop beers. So that means that within 24 hours, they're pulling those hop cones off of the vine, sending it to the brewer, and within 24 hours, those hops are in a beer. For us in Florida, we're typically using hops that are a few months old. Best case scenario would be a few months old.
They've been kind of dried out or dehydrated?
Dried out. They're put in vacuum-sealed bags. They're stored cold. So we're doing everything we can to maintain the freshness of those hops.
Stephanie, what kind of beer do you like?
I'm a hop head. I love the IPAs, the APAs. Partially started as like a college kid that wanted to get the bang for your buck because you can, pay the same price and get something that's like 7% alcohol. But I also just love the hoppy taste and the floral taste. So if I'm at a concert or something, I would pick up High Lie on tap or whatever. I can appreciate like a coffee stout or something like that, but the darker beers are a little too heavy for me. So I usually go with the ales.
What's a hoppy taste?
It's like bitter, I guess, and kind of floral. So I love it, but I have a lot of friends who take one sip of an IPA and they just like make this face and they're like, oh, God, I can't. It's too harsh. Yeah.
That's probably the easiest analogy is to say that hoppy means bitter, but that's not always the case. High Lie IPA, which is that's our flagship, for instance, I think of it as a very hoppy beer, but it's not a bitter beer. So sometimes those two are not always synonymous. Hops can also mean bright tangerine, grapefruit, clementine flavor. Mm-hmm. They can mean there's new experimental hops. There's one called Lemon Drop that literally tastes like lemon drops.
So it's something acidic, it sounds like. When you talk about those citrusy flavors, I know. Yeah.
Well,
we just have to drink more beer.
Right.
It's also
Do we want to try some High Lie?
Do you have that?
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
I came prepared.
So one of the things to remember too, though, is that to talk about something being hoppy is you really can't say, well, what does hoppy taste like? Because at this point, I don't even know how many different varieties of hops there are. Is it over 100 now? Different varieties?
Thousands.
Oh, thousands of. So, and you have everything from things that are very, for lack of a better term, dank and resiny, and there's some that that taste and smell like marijuana. There's some that taste and smell like grapefruit. So you have this wide range of aromatics and flavors and bitterness that to say, oh yeah, well this one's really hoppy, that in and of itself doesn't necessarily describe what it is you're actually tasting.
All right, but this one.
But this one,
we're going to open this.
Yeah,
this is a
this one's
highlight.
hoppy.
Okay, this is hoppy. So we're going to get an idea of what hoppy tastes like.
So Sean was mentioning earlier, IPAs are the biggest category in craft beer by heads and shoulders. What sets Jai Alai apart and why I think Jai Alai has found so much success in the IPA category is that it's not an overly bitter IPA. You're going to get this little bit of orange peel, tangerine, clementine quality. You're going to get a little bit of caramel. It's coming from the malt that we're using. Just a touch of bitterness. The bitterness is in there to provide balance. It's not supposed to beat you over the head with the bitterness.
But it's there. So it's like the pith of the tangerine peel or the lemon peel. And people love it. Stephanie is loving it. I am going back to the cucumber Saison immediately. I mean, the Saison is so much more for me.
Sure. And
this is bitter for me, this Jai Alai. And I know this is super popular.
It is super popular. Right now, Jai Alai IPA. Jai Alai IPA is the number one selling craft 6-pack can in grocery stores in the country.
What?
And we're only in 22 states.
That's amazing.
What? Really?
Absolutely.
Okay, we're going to have to fact check that.
Sure. Oh, you can. It's so, I don't know if we need to include this in the podcast, but
it's all included.
If you're You need to be specific. Craft 6-pack can. So if it's a 6-pack in glass, then we're talking about a different category. If we're talking about a 12-pack can, different category. But craft 6-pack can in the entire country, all through essentially IRI is a data collection group that just if you scan a barcode, grocery stores, Total Wine, ABC, those kinds of places report through IRI. So this is the number one selling craft 6-pack can in the entire country.
Mazel tov.
Thank you. We're trying. Cheers.
So
cheers.
You brought up Goose Island. Is that still considered a craft beer? Right, because it's owned by InBev or Anheuser-Busch? Yeah.
Correct. And again, I think most of us defer to the Brewers Association definition, which is small, independent, and traditional.
Mm-hmm. So it's owned by InBev, but 20% of it is still brewed locally?
They're 100% owned by Budweiser.
Okay, so that's not craft beer.
It started as craft beer in Chicago, I believe, and then they were bought.
Stephanie Colombini, Florida Matters producer. Sean Nordquist, executive director of the Florida Brewers Guild. Neil Callahan, brand ambassador for Cigar City Brewing, and Danny Dom, co-owner of Mastery's Brewery in St. Pete Beach. Thank you all for being here.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you.
That conversation originally aired on the podcast Florida Matters More. Well, thank you so much for listening. We really do appreciate it. We love sharing our enthusiasm for Florida's food scene. And you can help us spread the word by sharing our Facebook posts at the Zest Podcast Facebook page. You can find recipes from our stories at thezestpodcast.com. I'm Robin Sussingham. Dalia Colon and I produce The Zest with help from Megan Trimble, Mark Hayes, and Craig George. The Zest is a production of WUSF Public Media.